Time for another episode of Flashback. Tracks from the past.
Start up your terminal programs and let's dial into an episode about the sunset era of the bulletin board systems. In episode 50, we covered the BBS scene from the late 70s to the early 90s. If you didn't know anything about what was in store in 1990, it was easy to believe that the age of the boards would last forever. It certainly would not. Necros of PM, and the song is called Click. In the early 90s, everything got faster, cheaper, and better. The system operators, they were almost gods in their owning of expensive hardware and hard-to-set-up software. And now, any dude with a 386, Amiga or Atari could create a board for themselves. And they could rule over the debating forums and the file areas. A frustrated but unknown Sysop wrote this in 1995. "The modem scene is far too big. Face it, how many boards have you ever heard of? Too many. And that's still just a fart in space of all boards that have ever and does still exist. Did you know that 60% of all boards closes down within a month due to user inactivity? Everybody with a modem has come up with the dream of starting their own board, letting people call yourself, getting free wares instead of big phone bills. Cute, but few succeeding. Okay, if we ignore the bad grammar and that fart of a Swedish colloquialism that no one really understands outside our country, that is a brutal takedown of the scene, don't you think? ArchAngel, Archons of Light. I don't think that elitist nonsense is good for anything, except the feeling of being superior and the creation of a camaraderie that just made the scene look like a king of the hill scenario. With the possibility of anyone getting to cut their teeth as a Sysop, this was the advent of BBS-es as a true hobbyist network. I started my own BBS on the 18th of October 1993, running on an Amiga 500. But we discussed that in an earlier episode of this podcast. It was a great way to learn computers, script-based programming, social media before they even existed, and just how much of a diplomat you had to be. I will share a few memories never told on this podcast before, but we must then continue into the sunset of the modem era.
where the journey begins and ends. It is hidden in mist, full of mystery and dreams.
Cooth and the Misty Lake. Time for the first story. Even if it was easy to set up a typical board compared to the 80s, there were still a number of hurdles to overcome. I wrote a lot of commands in Arexx, the Amiga flavor of IBM Rexx. It was an easy language to learn, and I had a good reference manual. So I often got questions from people asking me how to fix problems or build functions. This was very fun, and sharing the code and the knowledge was what we did. And others would show you ways to improve your own crappy code. Then there was Peter. The name is his own, because why should we protect the guilty? He didn't ask people to help him. He tried to make you write the whole script that he wanted for his board. And once he offered to pay another Sysop to build a script, and then refused to pay. Quite a character, and he had to flee the scene after the other Sysops were running him out on a metaphorical rail with tar and feather. Let's hope it was metaphorical. Purple Motion Sundance. I wrote a joke full text with several characters, I mean the users, typically found on a BBS. It was called So Du Vill Bli Sysop, and I probably over-exaggerated quite a bit. But not as much as you might think. So, there we are. BBS fed the Sysop's feeling of self-worth, so it's not that weird that most of the other users on any board were Sysops themselves. And we had people from various backgrounds. There were few women. My girlfriend was the only one on my board. So let's take a look who they were. But the music, it must flow. pulse, fountain of size. Who was the typical user on my BBS? It's the only BBS I can talk about, as I don't know about the users on other boards, even the ones I visited. Most of them lived in Stockholm, Sweden. The user was, as I noted before, almost guaranteed to be male, and the age was between 15 and 25, where the most common age was between 16 and 19. I was myself 18 when I started the BBS. He was commonly either far left or mildly right-wing. There were quite a few near or real communists. The debates between them and the right-wingers were fierce. I guess the silent majority was not into politics or centrist. But when you're young, you may have a bit of a political fire in your belly. Necros and Basehead. They seem to be searching for the lost riff, and I think they found it. Back to the typical BBS user on my BBS. Religion was not really a thing for them. There could be, well, sometimes some mild homophobia, but the user base was large enough that the intolerants got some serious criticism for writing such things. By today's standards, a lot of things could be said that might not fly today, but racism and more overt intolerances were shunned and got fierce response. I would say people were generally quite accepting, but in their youth a bit radical at the time. MiKeY Music Afterlife. Computer nerdery was rampant. PC dudes against Amigaites. Sounds like good headlines, right? We discussed all the technology, whether we knew about them or not. One discussion was about CPU speed, and someone claimed that PC megahertz and Amiga MHz, they were not the same thing. This is kind of how silly those debates could be when they did not work. Windows 95 was a hotly debated topic, and so was the future of the Amiga after Commodore went under. Music tastes. They were generally not mainstream at all. Punk, heavy techno, some hip-hop, and many of the synth bands were admired. My own taste in Beatles, it was a bit laughable back then, and Eurotechno was out in the cold. ArchAngel is back, and this time it's Essence of Life. I must not forget that FidoNet was a thing. It was a hobbyist Usenet, with many thousands of BBSs participating. Maybe some would like to call it a precursor to Internet, but I don't think that's correct. FidoNet mostly used phone lines and a hierarchic structure. My BBS was known to the world as 2:201/370.0. It lived in the large mesh of the FidoNet and acted as something known as a node. It sent and received messages to and from the FidoNet to a hub that related even further. FidoNet's email-like service was known as EchoMail, and typically you had to wait 3 days from sending a message before getting an answer. A typical node only dialed to its hub once per day. FidoNet still exists today, but it's only a shadow of its past. Dozen doves divided. Let's hope they didn't do that with a knife. I don't like animal cruelty. Back on the rail to the end station of this program. The question is, why did the BBS era end? The modems got faster, and we went from 2,400 to 14,400, and then in 1995, 28,800 was becoming a thing. But in the background, internet was coming of age. In 1994, some newspapers here in Sweden opened sites that gave you the feeling of a souped-up tele-text-page. Yeah, you know, the ones you had on TVs back in the day. On the 5th of February 1994, our then Swedish Prime Minister Carl Bildt sent an email to the then President of the United States, Bill Clinton. 2 days later, Mr. Bildt spoke about the internet in an address to mainly Ericsson managers in Kista. Internet access was yet too expensive, but in 1995 it started taking off. M.B. Badley's Prelude to War. In 1996, the internet was everywhere, and I saw the user base of my BBS dwindle. There was a sharp dive between the spring and autumn of 1996. This had many reasons. I was tying up the lines a lot when I using the internet on my new PC. My girlfriend left me. And of course, the internet. Sites on the internet generally talks about 1995 as the true nadir of the boards, and maybe it was so. Next episode of this three-part story about the history of BBSs. Well, then we will talk about the desert wandering years between 1997 and 2015, and then the reignition of the boards. Lizard King, Age of Legends. The third and final episode in this set of episodes about the BBS era. It will come out in a few weeks from now. But remember, the next episode of Flashback, Tracks from the Past, will be out next Saturday at 9 p.m. CET on the radio station and a few hours later on your podcast player. My name is DJ Daemon, and I thank you for listening. Leading you into the good night, that would be Purple Motion and Straying Voyages. And final song will be AARD, Hour of Truth.
The ericade radio network, best enjoyed in the glow of your modem's light.